The endless prairie shimmered in the summer heat as Dasch'aa Redcloud crouched low, tracking fresh bison prints. The Apache scout froze at an unfamiliar sound metal against leather. Through tall grass, he spotted her, a white girl with copper hair, struggling with a rifle too heavy for her small frame. Behind her, dust clouds rose-hide hunters closing in. The girl hadn't seen them yet, but Dasch'aa had. In that moment, he faced an impossible choice: disappear into the grassland or risk everything to save an intruder on Apache hunting grounds. Could this unlikely pair of strangers, separated by language, age, and the bitter history of their peoples, somehow forge a bond strong enough to change the fate of the last great bison herd? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn broke over the railroad survey camp with the clang of metal tools and barked orders. Lottie Caldwell sat stiffly at the makeshift dining table, picking at salt pork and beans, while her father, William Caldwell, entertained 3 investors from Chicago. She'd spent nearly an hour getting dressed, her copper hair pinned severely beneath a modest hat, her high collar choking in the prairie heat. All to please father, who barely glanced her way. "Gentlemen, this stretch of land will yield the most economical route," William announced, spreading maps across the table. "We'll save nearly 8 miles of track compared to the Northern Passage." "What about the natives, Caldwell?" asked Mr. Fairbanks, the oldest investor, his silver moustache twitching with concern. William waved dismissively. "The cavalry keeps them in check. Besides, most tribes have been relocated south." Lottie's hand tightened around her fork. "Father," she interjected, "Samuel says Apache scouts still hunt buffalo in these parts." Her father's eyes flashed with irritation. "Charlotte, the opinions of our cook hardly constitute intelligence reports." The men chuckled, and heat rose in Lottie's cheeks. She retreated to her tent after breakfast, retrieving the leather-bound journal hidden beneath her cot. Inside were sketches of buffalo she'd copied from Samuel's descriptions: majestic beasts with shaggy heads and powerful shoulders. She'd never seen one alive, only their bleached skulls scattered across the plains. "Miss Charlotte," called Mr. Holcomb, her father's assistant, from outside. "Your father requests you remain in camp today. No wandering." Lottie bit back a sharp retort. "Of course, Mr. Holcomb." When he left, she flipped to a fresh page in her journal and began planning. Samuel had mentioned a buffalo herd grazing 10 miles west. Father's prized Sharps rifle stood in the corner of his tent. If she left before sunrise tomorrow, she could return with a trophy before anyone realized she was gone. Later, she found Samuel preparing supper, his dark hands expertly shaping biscuit dough. "Samuel," she said casually, "those buffalo you mentioned, do they move quickly?" The old man's eyes, wise from 60 years of hard living, studied her face. "Miss Lottie, buffalo ain't like nothing you ever hunted back east. They can outrun any horse when spooked." "But I'm an excellent shot," she insisted. "Father taught me himself." Samuel wiped flour from his hands. "Shooting at paper targets ain't the same as killing a beast that's fed native peoples for generations." He lowered his voice. "The Sioux consider them sacred. Apache too. Some things deserve respect, not trophies." Lottie frowned. "It's just an animal." "So are we, Miss Lottie," Samuel replied. "Just animals who forgot our place." Before dawn, Lottie slipped from her tent, father's heavy Sharps rifle awkward in her grip. She'd left a note claiming she was gathering wildflowers, bought herself a few hours at least. The eastern sky barely showed light as she mounted her mare, Penny, and headed west. The morning unfurled into brilliant sunshine as Lottie rode farther than she'd ever ventured alone. Her excitement mounted with each passing mile. She would prove herself today not as William Caldwell's proper daughter, but as a true adventurer. She imagined her father's pride when she returned with proof of her courage and skill. The endless grassland stretched around her, beautiful and alien. Samuel's warnings echoed faintly, but she pushed them aside. This was America's bounty, and she was American to her bones. What right did natives have to claim these animals for themselves? Progress required sacrifice, her father said so constantly. By mid-morning, Lottie spotted them, dark shapes grazing in the distance. Her heart raced. Real buffalo, just as she'd imagined. She dismounted, tied Penny to a scrubby tree, and approached on foot, the heavy rifle growing heavier with each step. Her hands trembled with anticipation as she crept through the tall grass, rehearsing her father's instructions. Steady breathing, firm stance, gentle squeeze. She never noticed the silent figure watching from a nearby ridge or the dust clouds rising behind her. Dasch'aa Redcloud had traveled 16 days from Mescalero lands, guided by dreams of buffalo that pulled him northward like a visible thread. His people rarely ventured this far into contested territory, but the visions had been insistent. The last great herds were in danger. He adjusted the medicine pouch hanging at his chest, fingers brushing the sacred contents. A buffalo tooth from his first hunt, sage collected at his grandfather's burial, and a small clay bead shaped by his mother's hands. The pouch carried more strength than the cavalry's rifles, connecting him to ancestors who had followed the buffalo since before memory. Dasch'aa had been tracking the herd for 3 days when he discovered the hide hunters' camp. 6 white men with wagons, skinning knives, and enough ammunition to kill hundreds. He'd crouched in darkness, listening to their plans through tobacco smoke and whiskey boasts. "This herd's got at least 400 head," a bearded hunter had said. "Government pays $2 per hide. We'll be rich men by month's end." "Injun's been spotted," another warned. "Army's offering $10 for Apache scalps. Good money if we find one." Dasch'aa had slipped away to warn his small hunting party camped 8 miles south. Apache families needed buffalo meat for the coming winter, but they took only what was necessary, honoring each kill with prayers. These white hunters wanted only hides, leaving meat to rot under the prairie sun. Now, as morning light stretched across the grasslands, Dasch'aa followed fresh tracks from the main herd a small group had separated during the night. He moved like a shadow through the tall grass, reading the land's story, buffalo hoofprints, prairie dog burrows, the distant cry of hawks. The wind shifted, carrying an unfamiliar scent, leather and metal, horse sweat and rosewater, white people smells. Dasch'aa froze, scanning the rolling hills, until he spotted movement, a single horse, tied to a scrubby cottonwood. No adult white man would travel alone in these lands. Hunting parties kept together, surveyors traveled with escorts. He circled downwind, approaching through a shallow depression. That's when he saw her, a white girl with hair the color of autumn grass, struggling with a rifle almost as tall as herself. Her clothes were too fine for the frontier, her movements untrained. The girl was stalking buffalo, but doing it all wrong upwind, making too much noise, her bright clothes visible at a distance. No buffalo would let her close enough for a shot, but that wasn't what concerned Dasch'aa. Beyond the girl, perhaps 2 miles back, dust clouds rose. The hide hunters were following the same separated buffalo, riding directly toward her. Dasch'aa touched his medicine pouch. The spirits had placed him here for a purpose. But what? This girl was the enemy's child. Her people brought destruction, pushing steel rails across sacred lands, killing buffalo for sport, driving Apache families from ancestral homes. The sensible choice was to remain hidden, to let nature balance accounts. Yet she was young, 14 summers at most, younger than his sister before smallpox took her. And if the hunters found her, they would take her back to white settlements, their movements driving straight through the buffalo calving grounds Dasch'aa had pledged to protect. He weighed the risk against his mission. The hide hunters would reach her position within an hour. The main herd grazed less than a mile ahead. All paths were dangerous. Dasch'aa had survived 29 summers by trusting his instincts. As the girl crept forward, awkwardly balancing the heavy rifle, he made his decision. The fate of the last buffalo herd and, perhaps his people, might depend on what happened in the next few moments. Lottie steadied the Sharp's rifle against her shoulder, squinting through the sight. The nearest buffalo, a massive bull, grazed 70 yards away, too far for a clean shot. She needed to get closer. Her boot caught on a tangle of prairie grass as she crept forward. She stumbled, and the rifle butt struck the ground with a dull thud. The buffalo raised its shaggy head, nostrils flaring. A sudden movement to her right made her heart lurch. From the tall grass, a man rose like a spirit copper-skinned, dark-eyed, dressed in buckskin with a single eagle feather tied in his long black hair. An Indian, an Apache. Lottie's throat closed in terror. Tales of savage attacks and scalping filled her mind. She scrambled backward, raising the rifle with trembling hands. "Stay back," she warned, her voice high and thin. The man made no threatening moves. Instead, he gestured urgently westward, speaking words she couldn't understand. When she didn't respond, he pointed to his ear, then behind her. "I don't understand," Lottie said, keeping the rifle aimed at his chest. "Stay away from me." The man's expression shifted to frustration. He pointed again, more insistently, and made a rumbling sound while spreading his hands outward. Then he pointed to a rocky outcrop about 50 yards away. A sharp crack split the Ira rifle shot, then another. The sound came from behind her, in the direction the Indian had been pointing. The buffalo herd reacted instantly. The massive bull bellowed, and as one, the animals began to run directly toward Lottie. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. The Apache hadn't been threatening her, he'd been warning her. The man darted forward, reaching for her arm. Lottie jerked away, but he persisted, grabbing her sleeve and pulling her toward the rocky outcrop he'd indicated earlier. She resisted, still clutching the rifle. "Let me go," she demanded. The ground began to tremble beneath her feet. Looking over her shoulder, Lottie saw the buffalo herd transformed into a charging mass of fur and horn, dust rising in their wake. The Apache tugged more forcefully, his dark eyes intense with urgency. The rational part of her mind broke through her panic. If he'd wanted to harm her, he could have done so while she was unaware of his presence. And now he was pulling her towards safety, not away from it. Lottie made her choice. She stopped resisting and began running alongside him toward the rocks. The thunder of hooves grew deafening. The Apache ran swiftly despite the uneven terrain, his hand firmly gripping her arm. Lottie's lungs burned, and the heavy rifle threw off her balance. She stumbled again, falling to one knee. Without hesitation, the man pulled her up, then pried the rifle from her grip. Before she could protest, he slung it over his shoulder and pulled her forward with renewed urgency. They reached the base of the outcrop with the herd less than 100 yards behind them. The Apache pushed her toward a narrow crevice in the rocks, following close behind. The space widened into a small hollow just large enough for them both. The ground shook violently as hundreds of buffalo thundered past their shelter. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. The noise was overwhelming, snorting, bellowing, the drum of heavy hooves striking earth. Lottie pressed herself against the rock wall, eyes wide with terror and awe. A broken arrow shaft lay in the dust at their feet, perhaps left by hunters from years past. The Apache's gaze met hers in the dim light of their rocky shelter. For a moment, fear and mistrust hung between them like the dust in the air. Then he did something unexpected. He offered her canteen. Outside, the earth continued to tremble as the massive herd flowed around their sanctuary like a river of flesh and fury. The world narrowed to their rocky shelter as the buffalo herd thundered past. Lottie had never experienced anything so primal, so overwhelming. The massive bodies created their own weather storm of dust and sound that blotted out the sun. Through gaps in the rocks, she glimpsed a sea of dark fur and curved horns, muscles rippling beneath shaggy coats. Not the docile creatures from her sketches, but forces of nature, powerful and unstoppable. The Apache remained motionless beside her, watching the stampede with intense focus. Despite her fear, Lottie found herself studying him. His face was weathered by sun and wind, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He carried himself with quiet dignity, nothing like the savage caricatures in Harper's weekly illustrations. A gunshot cracked in the distance, then another. Through the dust, Lottie spotted men on horseback at the herd's edge, firing indiscriminately. Buffalo fell, some instantly dead, others wounded and bellowing in pain. The Apache's expression hardened. His hand moved to the knife at his belt, knuckles white with tension. Though they shared no language, his disgust was unmistakable. The hunter's wagon appeared briefly through the dust, two men loading hides, while others continued shooting. Then it vanished as the stampede shifted direction, cutting off the hunters from their companions. For nearly 20 minutes, they remained in their stone sanctuary as the herd passed. Gradually, the thunder subsided, the last stragglers, mostly calves, and their mother strutted past. Then, Eerie silence descended, broken only by the calls of circling ravens drawn to the carnage. The Apache gestured for Lottie to stay put while he climbed to higher ground. From her shelter, she watched him survey the transformed landscape, his silhouette stark against the sky. Finally, he motioned for her to join him. Emerging from the rocks, Lottie gasped. The lush prairie had been trampled to bare earth, gouged by thousands of hooves. Dead and dying buffalo lay scattered where hunters' bullets had found them. In the distance, men were already at work, skinning carcasses with practiced efficiency, leaving meat to rot in the sun. A bright splash of color caught her eye, a red survey flag her father's team had planted, now trampled and half buried in the dirt. Penny! Lottie suddenly remembered her horse. She scanned the horizon, but the mare was nowhere in sight. The Apache seemed to understand. He pointed to hoof prints heading eastward. Penny had bolted during the stampede. Lottie's stomach sank. 10 miles from camp, no horse, the sun already past its zenith. Her grand adventure had become a desperate situation. The Apache pointed to himself, touching his chest. "Dasch'aa," he said clearly. Lottie blinked, understanding. "Dasch'aa," she repeated carefully. Then she pressed her hand to her own heart. "Lottie." He nodded once, then pointed toward the eastern horizon, making a walking motion with his fingers. His meaning was clear. They needed to start walking back. Lottie hesitated. Father had warned her never to trust Indians, but this man Dasch'aa had saved her life. Without him, she would have been trampled to death. Her practical situation settled the internal debate. Alone, she would never find her way back to camp. She needed his help, whether father would approve or not. Dasch'aa reached for the Sharps rifle he'd carried during their escape, weighing it in his hands. For a tense moment, Lottie feared he might keep it. Instead, he checked that it was unloaded, then offered it back to her, grip first. A gesture of trust, or perhaps a test. Lottie accepted the rifle, slinging it over her shoulder as she'd seen father do. "Thank you," she said, though she wasn't sure he understood. Dasch'aa nodded again, then began walking east, his footsteps certain even across the trampled earth. After a moment's hesitation, Lottie followed. The prairie sun beat down mercilessly as they walked. Lottie's fashionable boots, perfect for Boston parlors, raised blisters on her heels. Her throat grew parched, her legs leaden. Still, she refused to complain, matching her steps to Dasch'aa's steady pace. "How much farther?" she finally asked, knowing he wouldn't understand her words but hoping he'd grasp her meaning. Dasch'aa stopped, studying the position of the sun. He held up 4 fingers, then pointed to the horizon. 4 hours? Lottie guessed. Her heart sank. They wouldn't reach camp before nightfall. He seemed to read her disappointment. Pointing to a distant stand of cottonwoods, he made a sleeping gesture. Lottie understood they would need to make camp. When they reached the trees, Dasch'aa motioned for her to sit. He handed her his cantina leather water skin decorated with geometric patterns. Their shared water supply was now less than half full. "Thank you," Lottie said, taking a careful sip. The water tasted of leather and minerals, nothing like the filtered water at home. Dasch'aa walked a perimeter around their resting place, examining plants and soil. He returned with several prairie turnips and a handful of chokecherries, offering them to Lottie. She eyed the unfamiliar foods warily. "I'm not hungry," she lied, her stomach growling in contradiction. Dasch'aa shrugged and began preparing a small fire pit, arranging stones and gathering dry buffalo chips for fuel. Lottie watched with growing curiosity. "Where did you learn English words?" she asked, remembering his count of 4. "Trade," he answered simply, surprising her. "Some, not many." He struck sparks into his tinder with flint and steel. As shadows lengthened, Lottie's hunger overcame her hesitation. She tried a prairie turnip, finding it fibrous but sweet. The chokecherries puckered her mouth, but offered welcome moisture. Dasch'aa roasted the remaining turnips in the coals. The improved flavor made Lottie realize how little she knew about surviving in this land. "My father's camp," she attempted to explain, pointing eastward. "Railroad." She mimicked the sound of a train whistle. "Iron horse," Dasch'aa nodded. "White man's trail." Night descended swiftly. The temperature dropped, and Lottie shivered in her light clothing. Without comment, Dasch'aa removed his buckskin overshirt, offering it to her while keeping his lighter undershirt. Pride made her want to refuse, but common sense prevailed. "Thank you," she said again, wrapping the garment around her shoulders. It smelled of smoke, sage, and unfamiliar herbs. Distant howls pierced the darkness. Wolves. Lottie tensed, instinctively moving closer to the fire. "Not close," Dasch'aa assured her. "No fear." Despite his words, he positioned himself between her and the direction of the howls, checking his knife and the small bow he carried. "You saved my life," Lottie said suddenly. "From the buffalo. Why?" Though her question contained words he might not know, Dasch'aa seemed to understand. He studied her face in the firelight before answering. "Young," he said finally, gesturing to indicate her height. "Like sister." A shadow crossed his features. "Sister gone, white man sickness." Lottie absorbed this, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and shame. "I'm sorry," she offered, the words inadequate. As the fire burned low, Dasch'aa taught her to create a sleeping place from prairie grasses. The improvised bed was surprisingly comfortable. Before lying down, he checked their surroundings once more, then placed himself between Lottie and the open prairie. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every rustle and night sound startled her, yet she felt oddly secure knowing Dasch'aa kept watch, this stranger who had every reason to be her enemy. In the deepest part of night, Lottie glanced at the stars, brilliant and unfamiliar in their vastness. She realized with startling clarity that she was seeing the same sky Dasch'aa's people had watched for countless generations, the same sky the buffalo followed in their ancient migrations. For the first time, she felt very small in a very large world. By midday, dark clouds gathered on the western horizon. Dasch'aa studied the sky with concern, changing their course slightly northward. "Storm coming," he explained, using gestures to indicate thunder and rain. They traveled another hour before the first fat raindrops fell. Wind whipped across the open prairie, bending the grasses horizontal. Lightning flashed, followed by rumbling thunder that Lottie felt in her chest. Within minutes, they were drenched. Dasch'aa quickened their pace, scanning the landscape. When he spotted a formation of weathered sandstone, he touched Lottie's elbow, pointing, "There." The sandstone coulee offered shelter beneath an overhanging ledge. They huddled in the dry space as rain hammered the plains. Water streamed down the rock face, creating a curtain across the entrance to their temporary refuge. "How long?" Lottie asked, wringing water from her skirt. Dasch'aa shrugged. "Sun there." He pointed to a spot in the western sky, currently hidden by clouds. "When storm ends." "Hours, then." Lottie sighed, settling against the cool stone wall. The day's walking had exhausted her, and the rhythmic sound of rainfall soon lulled her to sleep. She woke disoriented, uncertain how much time had passed. The rain continued, though less intensely. Dasch'aa sat at the mouth of their shelter, whittling a piece of wood with methodical precision. Beside him lay Lottie's saddlebag, the one she'd grabbed from Penny before setting out on her hunt. The bag was open. Lottie scrambled to her knees. "What are you doing? Those are my things." Dasch'aa looked up, his expression troubled. In his hands were her father's survey, maps detailed drawings of the planned railroad route, including topographical features, elevation changes, and proposed bridge locations. William had given them to her reluctantly, suggesting she learn the family business during their expedition. "Iron Horse Path," Dasch'aa said, tapping the red line that marked the planned route. "Yes, the railroad," Lottie confirmed, reaching for the maps. "My father's railroad. Those are private. Give them back." Dasch'aa didn't relinquish the documents. Instead, he spread them fully on the dry ground, studying them intently. His finger traced the route, stopping at a particular location marked with surveyor's notations. "What?" Lottie asked, curiosity overcoming her indignation. Dasch'aa placed a small rock on the map. "Buffalo," he said. Then he arranged several smaller pebbles around it. "Babies." Lottie frowned, not understanding. Dasch'aa tried again. "Buffalo mothers," he said, moving his hands to mime a swollen belly. "Make new buffalo here, every spring." He tapped the location where the railroad was planned to cut directly through. A carving ground, Lottie guessed. Yes, sacred place. His expression grew intense. Iron horse here, buffalo gone. Forever. Understanding dawned slowly. The railroad would destroy an essential buffalo breeding ground. No wonder Dasch'aa had been patrolling the area. Father doesn't know, Lottie said, though she wasn't certain Dasch'aa understood. He's never even seen a live buffalo. Railroad men know land? Dasch'aa asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Lottie's cheeks warmed. They study maps, reports. Even to her own ears, the explanation sounded hollow. Dasch'aa shook his head. Not no land, not no buffalo ways. He gestured expansively. Apache no, Sioux no, buffalo come here since grandfather's grandfathers. The rain had stopped. Sunlight slanted through the coulee entrance, illuminating the maps between them. Lottie studied the red line marking the railroad's path. If what Dasch'aa said was true, her father's great achievement would destroy something irreplaceable. The route isn't final, she said slowly, an idea forming. Father and the surveyors are still making decisions. Dasch'aa watched her carefully, sensing her shift in thinking. This map, Lottie continued, touching the paper, it's just one possibility. There could be others. For the first time, she saw a flicker of hope in Dasch'aa's eyes. Show, he said simply, offering her a piece of charcoal from their small fire. Dawn light filtered into the coulee, illuminating the makeshift map they had created overnight. Using charcoal from their small fire, Lottie and Dasch'aa had sketched an alternative railroad route directly onto her father's survey document. It wasn't pretty, but it told a compelling story. Father always says the shortest path costs least, Lottie explained, tracing the original route with her finger. That's why they chose this line. Dasch'aa nodded, understanding the concept if not every word. He pointed to their alternative path, which curved northward around the carving grounds before rejoining the original route. Longer, he acknowledged, but buffalo live. Lottie studied both options. The detour would add approximately 8 miles of track, increasing costs significantly, yet weighed against the extinction of the great herds. Buffalo important, Dasch'aa said, as if reading her thoughts. Give meat, skins for lodges, bones for tools. He touched items on his person: moccasins, belt, knife handle, all derived from buffalo. Everything from buffalo. My father sees them as obstacles, Lottie admitted, or trophies. He's never understood their importance. White men take, not give back, Dasch'aa said simply. Land has balance. Buffalo part of balance. Lottie couldn't argue. She'd witnessed the waste first-hand skinned carcasses left to rot, taken only for hides or sport. How far to trading post? She asked, pointing east. Dasch'aa considered. Walk 2 days, need horses. Lottie calculated quickly. Her father expected the survey team to finalize the route within a week. They needed to reach the surveyors before decisions were locked in steel and capital. We have 3, maybe 4 days, she said. If we get horses at the trading post, can we reach the main survey team in time? Dasch'aa's eyes narrowed in concentration as he processed her words. Yes, if fast, if no trouble. Trouble seemed likely, Lottie thought, but didn't say. A young white girl traveling with an Apache would raise suspicions anywhere on the frontier. My father will listen, she asserted with more confidence than she felt. He's a businessman. If I explain about the carving grounds, perhaps he'll understand the consequences. Dasch'aa looked skeptical but nodded. Fathers protect children, he said. Listen to daughters. They carefully rolled the maps and returned them to Lottie's saddlebag. Outside the coulee, the prairie had been transformed by rain. New scents rose from the damp earth, and distant wildflowers created patches of color against the green expanse. As they resumed walking eastward, Lottie found herself noticing details she'd overlooked before: prairie dog towns with their busy inhabitants, hawks riding thermal currents, delicate spiderwebs jeweled with raindrops. Dasch'aa moved through this landscape with intimate familiarity, showing Lottie which plants were edible, which held medicine. That plant, he said, pointing to a low-growing herb with yellow flowers, stops bleeding. And that one? Lottie asked, indicating a different plant. Tea for cough, he explained. this prairie big medicine chest. By midday, they established a comfortable rhythm, Dasch'aa teaching Lottie Apache words for landscape features while she explained railroad terminology. Each small exchange built their unusual partnership. "Cut," she said, making a slicing motion with her hand when they crossed a gully. "Engineers cut through hills for level track. Fill," she continued as they crossed a low area. "Build up land where it's too low." "Many changes to land," Dasch'aa observed. "Progress requires change," Lottie replied automatically, repeating her father's frequent assertion. Dasch'aa's expression remained neutral, but his response carried quiet weight. Change, not always progress. The words stayed with Lottie as they continued eastward, their shadow selves stretching before them like omens of the journey ahead. Late afternoon brought them to a shallow creek. As Lottie knelt to refill their canteen, Dasch'aa suddenly stiffened, his head turning sharply westward. Before she could question him, he pulled her into the cover of nearby willows. "What?" she began, but his raised hand silenced her. Dasch'aa pointed to fresh hoofprints along the muddy bank. "Not buffalo horses, shod horses." "Hide hunters," he whispered, "looking for us." Lottie's pulse quickened. "Why would they look for us?" "Wagon gone in stampede," blame Apache. His face hardened. "White men see me with white girl, think I take you." The implications chilled her. A white girl supposedly kidnapped by an Apache would justify any violence against him. "We should separate," Lottie suggested. "I'll explain." "No." Dasch'aa's voice was firm. "Hide hunters, not soldiers, not care about truth." He picked up a spent rifle cartridge half buried in the mute evidence of their recent presence. "Kill Apache, take scalp for bounty, maybe hurt you too." The brass shell casing glinted dully in his palm, a manufactured artifact amid the natural landscape. Dasch'aa let it fall back to the earth with quiet contempt. "How many?" Lottie whispered. "4 men, 2 hours behind." He studied the sky. "Need to move fast. No fire tonight." They abandoned the creek, traveling instead along a rocky ridge where they would leave fewer tracks. Dasch'aa guided Lottie carefully, showing her how to walk on stone, how to use branches to brush away footprints in softer ground. "Like ghosts," he explained, "no trail." By sunset, they'd reached a vantage point overlooking the plains they'd crossed. In the distance, 4 riders moved deliberately along their original path, following their trail with methodical precision. "They're tracking us," Lottie whispered, though the hunters were far beyond earshot. Dasch'aa nodded grimly. "Good trackers. No, I am Apache." "How can you tell?" "They follow sign, not just footprints. Check every stream crossing. Look for bent grass, broken twigs." A hint of professional respect colored his voice. "Hunter named Breen. Best tracker with hide hunters. Learned from Pawnee." "You know him?" Lottie asked, surprised. "Know of him. He knows of me." Dasch'aa touched his medicine pouch. "Once took bullet meant for buffalo herd. He saw me watching from ridge." They continued until nightfall, making camp in a dense thicket without fire despite the evening chill. Lottie huddled in Dasch'aa's buckskin shirt, her teeth chattering slightly. "Can they track us in darkness?" she asked. "No, but morning comes." Dasch'aa was silent a moment before adding, "Need to create false trail. Make them think we go south." "How?" "Tomorrow, we separate briefly. I go south, leave clear trail. You wait. I circle back, we continue east." Lottie considered this. "They'll follow your trail." "Yes, then lose it when I return on stones." He gestured to the rocky terrain they'd use. "By then we reach trading post. Get horses." "They might still catch up to you," Lottie pointed out. "I am faster alone," he assured her. "Apache know how to disappear." In the darkness, Lottie's mind filled with terrible images, Dasch'aa surrounded by hunters, her father receiving news that his daughter had been rescued, but her captor killed. The alternative route lost, the buffalo carving grounds destroyed. "It's too dangerous," she decided. "We stay together." Dasch'aa was silent for so long that Lottie thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, he spoke. "Why you care if Apache lives or dies?" The question caught her off guard. 2 days ago, she might have repeated her father's dismissive views of native peoples. Now, the words felt like ash in her mouth. "Because you saved my life," she answered simply. And because you're trying to save the buffalo. Dasch'aa nodded, accepting her answer. Sleep now. I watch first. As Lottie drifted toward uneasy sleep, she wondered what her father would think of her now collaborating with an Apache, hiding from white men, working to change the great railroad's path. She was no longer sure she cared. The trading post appeared on the horizon like a mirror crude collection of log buildings surrounded by a split-rail fence. Horses dozed in a corral while smoke curled from the main building's stone chimney. After 2 days of hard travel, sleeping rough and eating only what Dasch'aa could forage, the sight of civilization made Lottie's heart leap. They crouched in tall grass half a mile away, studying the scene. A freight wagon stood outside, and 3 men lounged on the porch, their rifles leaned against the wall within easy reach. You go alone, Dasch'aa said, his tone allowing no argument. I wait here. Lottie nodded reluctantly. They'd discussed the plan repeatedly. She would enter the trading post, purchase supplies and arrange for horses. No mention of Dasch'aa. No hint that she traveled with an Apache. Remember, he said, trader has Pawnee wife, Sarah. She help women. How do you know this? Lottie asked, not for the first time. Trading posts are. He searched for the word crossroads. Apache scouts learn all crossroads. They had successfully evaded the hide hunters after creating a false trail, but both knew the danger remained. Dasch'aa handed Lottie a small pouch. For horses, he explained, trade goods. Inside were several beautifully tanned rabbit skins and 2 intricately carved bone amulets. Lottie recognized their value, both practical and artistic. I can't take these, she protested. I have money. Money marks you, Dasch'aa countered. Railroad man's daughter with coins draws questions. These, he nodded at the items, just goods for trade. Reluctantly, Lottie accepted his logic. She tucked the pouch into her saddlebag, alongside the precious maps. I'll be quick, she promised. We'll meet at the cottonwood stand as planned. Dasch'aa touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of trust that surprised them both. Then he melted away into the prairie grasses, invisible within seconds. Lottie straightened her disheveled clothes, pinned her copper hair under her hat, and walked deliberately toward the trading post. With each step, she felt herself transforming back into Charlotte Caldwell, daughter of William Caldwell, railroad magnate. She squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. The men on the porch watched her approach with undisguised curiosity. Their conversation died as she drew near. Good afternoon, gentlemen, she said with practiced poise, channeling her finishing school training. I wonder if the proprietor is available. One man spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. Another nudged his companion, smirking, but the third, older than the others, stood and tipped his hat. McCready's inside, miss. You alone out here? My father's survey team is camped east of here, Lottie lied smoothly. I became separated during yesterday's ride. My horse bolted during the storm. The lie contained enough truth to sound convincing. The men relaxed visibly. Her story explained her presence without raising alarms. Inside, the trading post was dim and cluttered. Shelves sagged with goods ranging from flour sacks to iron cookware. Tobacco smoke hung in the air. Behind a rough-hewn counter stood a burly man with a grey-streaked beard. McCready, presumably. Well now, he said, eyebrows rising, don't often get young ladies visiting unescorted. Charlotte Caldwell, she introduced herself, extending her hand as if they were meeting in a Boston drawing room. My father is William Caldwell, overseeing the Transcontinental Survey. McCready's demeanor shifted instantly. The railroad meant business, prosperity. John McCready, miss. What brings you to my humble establishment? I was separated from our camp, she explained. I need to purchase a horse and some basic supplies. A woman emerged from the back, room middle-aged, with copper skin and dark hair streaked with silver. Her features suggested Pawnee heritage, but her dress was frontier, practicala, simple calico topped with a leather apron. Sarah, McCready said, Miss Caldwell here needs assistance. Sarah's dark eyes assessed Lottie carefully, noting her trail-worn appearance and the slight sunburn across her nose and cheeks. You've been traveling rough, she observed. Come, sit, take coffee while we discuss your needs. As Lottie followed Sarah to a small table, the older woman pressed something into her Palmer silver dollar. For luck, Sarah murmured. You'll need it, I think. Hoofbeats and jingling tack announced the cavalry patrol before Lottie saw them. She stood on the trading post porch, newly purchased supplies loaded onto a sturdy paint mare. Sarah had helped her select necessities, while Macready prepared the horse, asking remarkably few questions about her situation. 6 mounted soldiers approached in formation, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Their blue uniforms stood stark against the prairie backdrop, brass buttons and insignia catching the sunlight. At their head rode a young officer, straight-backed and serious beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Macready stepped beside Lottie. "Lieutenant Barrett," he identified the leader. "Regular patrol through these parts. Good timing for you, miss?" Lottie's heart sank. Her plan to slip away quietly had just evaporated. The patrol reined to a halt. Lieutenant Barrett Thardley, older than 25, removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Ma'am," he greeted her, then turned to Macready. "Any trouble to report?" "Quiet week," Macready replied. "Though this young lady could use your assistance, Miss Caldwell here got separated from her father's railroad survey team." Barrett's attention snapped fully to Lottie. "Caldwell? William Caldwell's daughter?" "Yes," Lottie confirmed reluctantly. "Miss Caldwell, we've been searching for you for 2 days." Barrett dismounted swiftly. "Your father has half the territory looking for you. He feared you'd been taken by hostiles." "Hostiles?" Lottie echoed, feigning confusion. "Sioux, most likely," said an older soldier with sergeant's stripes and a weathered face cross-hatched with sun lines. "They've been spotted near the railroad corridor, or could be a few of them ranging this far north lately." "I wasn't taken by anyone," Lottie stated firmly. "My horse spooked during the buffalo stampede. I've been trying to find my way back." "Alone? For 2 days?" The Sergeant Miller, by the name stitched on his uniform, looked skeptical. "Mighty lucky you survived, miss." Barrett silenced his subordinate with a glance. "We're escorting the survey team's supply wagon," he explained. "Your father is with the main party. We can deliver you safely to him by tomorrow afternoon." Lottie's mind raced. This could work to their advantage. The cavalry would take her directly to the survey team and her father. But what about Dasch'aa? He was waiting for her at the cottonwood stand, expecting to continue their journey together. "That's very kind," she said carefully. "I'd be grateful for the escort." Sarah appeared with a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Food for your journey," she said, pressing it into Lottie's hands. As she did, she whispered, "Look inside, for your friend." Lottie's breath caught, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Macready." Within an hour, Lottie found herself riding alongside Lieutenant Barrett at the head of the patrol. Her new mare kept pace easily with the military mounts. Behind them rode the 6 soldiers, including Sergeant Miller, who continued to watch her with undisguised suspicion. "Your father was frantic when your horse returned without you," Barrett said conversationally. "He offered a substantial reward for your safe return." "He worries unnecessarily," Lottie replied. "I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." Evidently, Barrett agreed with surprising respect. Still, these territories are dangerous for anyone traveling alone, especially with tensions high among the tribes. "What tensions?" Lottie asked, genuinely curious. "The Sioux resent the railroad," Barrett explained. "The Apache generally keep to themselves, but there have been reports of scouts watching the survey teams. And the smaller tribes are caught between some working with the army, others resistant." As they rode, Lottie discreetly examined the bundle Sarah had given her. Tucked between corn cakes was a folded piece of paper, a crude but effective map showing the patrol's likely route and marking alternative paths that paralleled it. Places where someone could travel unseen were noted with small X's. A message for Dasch'aa, Sarah had somehow known. When they made camp that evening, Lottie carefully placed small markers at the trail's edge, arrangements of stones and sticks that would appear natural to the soldiers, but would signal their direction to Dasch'aa. She positioned them while gathering kindling, an expected chore that aroused no suspicion. From across the campfire, Sergeant Miller watched her with narrowed eyes. The cavalry bugle sounded evening colors, its clear notes carrying across the darkening prairie a sound of civilization advancing inexorably westward. Dasch'aa moved like a shadow across the prairie, following the cavalry patrol from a distance of nearly half a mile. The girl had done well, leaving subtle markers that confirmed she traveled willingly with the soldiers. Each arrangement of stones told him something. Direction, number of soldiers, whether they suspected anything. He paused atop a low rise, studying the horizon through narrowed eyes. The patrol had made camp in a shallow valley beside a Creeker-standard military position with good water access and sightlines. Smoke from their fire rose in a thin column against the evening sky. A faint sound, the whisper of leather against grass, made him freeze. Not cavalry. They moved with metal and noise, confidence born of rifles and numbers. This was something else. Someone accustomed to moving silently through prairie terrain. Dasch'aa slowly lowered himself to the ground, becoming part of the landscape. He controlled his breathing, watching through grass stems as 5 mounted warriors crested a nearby hill. Sioux hunters, wearing minimal war paint, not a raiding party, then but a hunting group alert for trouble. Their leader, a young man with 2 eagle feathers in his hair, raised his hand. The party stopped, having spotted the cavalry encampment in the distance. They conversed quietly in Lakota, a language Dasch'aa understood only in fragments from trading encounters. He had few options. If he tried to retreat, they would certainly spot his movement. If he remained hidden, they might still discover him, and an Apache found skulking near both cavalry and Sioux would appear to be a spy. Dasch'aa made his decision. Moving deliberately, he stood, hands held palm outward, in the universal sign of peaceful intent. The reaction was immediate. The Sioux warriors wheeled their horses toward him, hands moving to weapons. The leader barked a command, and they formed a loose semicircle, effectively cutting off any escape. "I am Dasch'aa of the Mescalero Apache," he called in trade speech, the simplified mix of English, Spanish, and native words used between tribes. "I come in peace, following buffalo." The young leader rode forward, stopping his horse a few paces away. His face was proud, suspicious, but not openly hostile. "I am Young Elk of the Hunkpapa Sioux," he replied in the same trade language. "Why does Apache Scout travel so far from southern lands? Why do you watch blue coats?" Dasch'aa considered his answer carefully. The truth was complex, but lies would be detected. "I follow White Girl," he said simply. "She carries maps that threaten the last great buffalo herd, maps that show Iron Horse Path through sacred carving grounds." Young Elk's expression remained skeptical, but interest flickered in his eyes. "Why does Apache care about northern buffalo?" he challenged. "These are Sioux hunting grounds." "Buffalo do not recognize boundaries between tribes," Dasch'aa answered. "When last herds die, all people suffer." An older warrior with a deeply lined face spoke in Lakota to Young Elk, who nodded thoughtfully. "Black Horn says you speak truth about the Iron Road." Young Elk translated. "Our scouts have watched the white men measuring the land. They plan to cut earth where buffalo have carved, since grandfather's time. The girl and I seek to change the path," Dasch'aa explained. "Her father leads the Iron Road builders. She believes he will listen." Skeptical murmurs rose from the Sioux hunters. Young Elk silenced them with a gesture. "Why would white man's daughter help Apache save buffalo?" he asked, the reasonable question hanging in the twilight air. "She has seen," Dasch'aa said simply, "seen buffalo die for only their skins, seen how the land and the herds are connected. Her eyes are opening." Young Elk dismounted, a signal that immediate danger had passed. He retrieved an ornate pipe from a beaded bag at his waist, not yet lit, but its presence signified willingness to talk. "We have watched the survey party for many days," he revealed. "They measure, they make marks on paper, they drive stakes with colored flags. 3 days ago, the Ledera man with gray in his beard said they would decide the final path when the next supply wagon arrives." Dasch'aa absorbed this crucial information. "That wagon travels with the patrol, with the girl." Young Elk nodded. "Tomorrow they reach the main camp, then 1 more day before they decide." The timing was tight, perhaps too tight. Dasch'aa looked toward the distant cavalry camp where Lottie traveled. "Apache and Sioux have not always been friends," Young Elk said, following his gaze. "But against the Iron Horse, perhaps we find common cause." He extended the unlit Pipanot, yet an alliance, but an opening for one. The main survey camp sprawled across the prairie like a small town-white canvas tents in orderly rows, wagon corrals, cooking fires, and the constant movement of men and equipment. Steam rose from the portable blacksmith forge where tools were repaired, and the sharp report of theodolites being tested punctuated the afternoon air. As the cavalry patrol approached, a flurry of activity erupted. Men pointed, shouted, and a tall figure with a silver-streaked beard emerged from the largest tent, shielding his eyes against the sun. "Father," Lottie whispered, a strange mixture of emotions tightening her chest. William Caldwell strode toward them as they entered camp, his face transforming from anxious tension to profound relief. For once, the railroad magnate seemed oblivious to the business around him, his attention fixed solely on his daughter. "Charlotte," he called, reaching for her reins as Lieutenant Barrett halted the patrol. Lottie dismounted quickly, accepting her father's awkward embrace. He held her at arm's length, examining her sun-browned face and disheveled appearance. "Thank God," he murmured, "when your horse returned without you." He cleared his throat, mastering his emotion. "Lieutenant Barrett, I'm in your debt." Barrett touched his hat brim. "Found her at McCready's trading post, sir. She made her way there alone after being separated during the buffalo stampede." William's relief hardened into familiar sternness. "What were you thinking, riding out alone? You could have been killed or worse." Before Lottie could respond, a thin man with spectacles and meticulously trimmed moustache approached, followed by several assistants carrying maps and surveying equipment. "Miss Caldwell, what a relief," he said with formal precision. "Your father has been quite distracted by your absence." "Professor Hammond," Lottie greeted the chief surveyor, remembering him from previous meetings. "I apologize for any disruption to the work." "None at all," Hammond assured her, though his tight smile suggested otherwise. "In fact, we've made excellent progress. With the final measurements from yesterday's expedition, we're ready to lock in the route." He glanced at William. "We could review the finalized plans after dinner, if you're not too preoccupied with family matters." "Of course," William replied, returning to his businesslike demeanor. Nothing should delay the timetable. As her father and Hammond discussed logistics, Lottie scanned the busy camp. Near the engineering tent stood Mr. Holcomb, her father's assistant, watching her with undisguised disapproval. Unlike her father, Holcomb had never made any pretense of seeing her as more than an inconvenient responsibility, a woman in a man's world of commerce and construction. "Miss Charlotte requires rest and refreshment," announced a familiar voice. Samuel, the camp cook, approached with a tin cup of water. "Been through quite an ordeal, I expect." Lottie accepted the water gratefully. "Thank you, Samuel." His dark eyes held questions, but he asked none aloud. Instead, he said, "Your tent's been kept ready, miss. I'll bring some hot food directly." William instructed Holcomb to see to Lottie's horse, then escorted her through the camp. Workers touched their hats respectfully as they passed. To these men, she was the boss's daughter, valuable property safely recovered. "You'll tell me everything at dinner," her father said, pausing outside her tent. "For now, rest. You look." He struggled for an appropriate word, "weathered." Left alone, Lottie unpacked her saddlebag with trembling hands. The precious survey maps with their charcoal modifications remained hidden in an inner pocket. Through the canvas walls, she heard the continuing work of the survey team, the distinctive click and whir of the theodolite as it measured angles with precise certainty. She approached the instrument later, after washing and changing into clean clothes. Professor Hammond was demonstrating its use to junior surveyors, the brass and glass device gleaming in the late afternoon sun. "Ah, Miss Caldwell." Hammond nodded when he noticed her. "Interested in the tools of progress?" "Very much," she replied, studying the theodolite with genuine curiosity. "How accurate are your measurements?" "To within 1/10 of a degree," Hammond said proudly. "We can calculate elevations, distances, and grades with remarkable precision. This particular model cost over $400. "Impressive," Lottie agreed. "And does it measure the impact on the land's existing patterns, migration routes, breeding grounds?" Hammond's smile faltered slightly. "That's not within the instrument's purpose, Miss Caldwell. We measure what can be quantified." "Of course," she murmured. "Only what can be measured matters." Lottie waited until after dinner, when most of the camp settled into evening routines. Professor Hammond worked alone in the survey tent, oil lamps casting long shadows across his drafting table. She approached with rehearsed casualness, her saddlebag held close. "Professor Hammond, might I interrupt your work for a moment?" He looked up, surprised. "Miss Caldwell, shouldn't you be resting after your ordeal?" "I've had quite enough rest," she replied, stepping closer to examine the maps spread across his table. "Father gave me survey maps before my misadventure. I've been studying them." Hammond's expression registered polite skepticism. "Did he indeed? Well, your father has always been progressive about women's education." "May I show you something interesting I noticed?" Lottie asked, not waiting for permission before unrolling her own map beside his. She had carefully redrawn their charcoal alternative onto a clean page, making it appear as her own work, rather than a collaboration with Dasch'aa. Hammond adjusted his spectacles, examining her drawing. "You've proposed an alternative route," he observed, surprise evident in his voice. "Yes, the current plan takes the most direct path west." Lottie traced the original route with her finger, "but my alternative curves slightly northward before rejoining the main line here." "Interesting," Hammond murmured, professional curiosity overcoming his initial dismissiveness. "But why deviate? The straight route is more economical." Lottie had prepared for this question. "I noticed the topographical features in this region." She indicated the carving grounds without naming them as such. "The soil composition suggests seasonal flooding. Building there would require more extensive drainage work and possibly stronger foundations for the bridge supports." Hammond studied the maps more closely. "Your observation has merit," he admitted, though Mr. Holcomb's surveys didn't indicate significant drainage concerns. "Perhaps his surveys were conducted during the dry season," Lottie suggested. "I observed considerable moisture retention in the soil during my unexpected excursion." She held her breath as Hammond compared the routes, measuring distances with a brass compass. "Your alternative would add approximately 8 miles of track," he calculated. "That's significant additional expense, but potentially less than continual repairs to tracks laid across seasonally unstable ground," Lottie countered. "Father always says that proper planning prevents poor performance." Hammond's mouth twitched with amusement at hearing William Caldwell's favorite maxim quoted by his daughter. "You make a compelling case, Miss Caldwell. Though I must say, I'm surprised by your interest in railway engineering." "I've grown up with it," Lottie said truthfully, "and this trip has given me new perspectives on the land we're crossing." Hammond rolled up his maps thoughtfully. "I could present both options at tomorrow's meeting," he offered. "Though I should warn you, Mr. Holcomb strongly advocates for the original route. He's quite convinced it represents the optimal balance of efficiency and economy." "All I ask is that both options be considered," Lottie said, careful not to appear too eager. "On their merits." "Very well," Hammond agreed. "I'll add it to the agenda." As Lottie turned to leave, Hammond called after her, "Miss Caldwell, your father mentioned you encountered buffalo during your misadventure." Lottie tensed. "Yes, a large herd. Fascinating creatures," Hammond mused, "though quite the obstacle to progress. Did you know that the army has begun actively encouraging their elimination to clear the way for settlement and railway construction?" "I wasn't aware of that policy," Lottie said carefully. "Quite practical, really." Hammond continued, oblivious to her discomfort. "The indigenous population depends on buffalo. Remove the buffalo, and the resistance to westward expansion naturally diminishes." Lottie's hands clenched at her sides. "A convenient calculation." "Indeed. Like all good engineering, it's simply a matter of identifying the most efficient solution to the problem at hand." In the drafting tent's corner sat a detailed, topographical model of the region, three-dimensional representation of the land they planned to conquer with steel and steam. Hills, valleys, rivers, all meticulously recreated in miniature. But nowhere in the model were there any buffalo, any native encampments, any acknowledgement of the life that already existed there. "Good night, Professor," Lottie said, unable to continue the conversation. "Thank you for considering my suggestion." She stepped into the cool night air, looking up at stars that suddenly seemed very distant. Tomorrow's meeting would determine not just a railroad route, but the future of the great herds and the people who depended on them. The meeting convened in the command tent at precisely 9 o'clock, marked by William Caldwell's gold pocket watch, snapping shut with authority. Arranged around the large map table stood the decision-makers. William at the head, Professor Hammond to his right, Mr. Holcomb to his left, two Boston investors, and Lieutenant Barrett, representing the military's interests. Lottie stood quietly in the corner, invited by her father as a courtesy after her ordeal, not as a participant, but as an observer to further her education. The men nodded politely at her presence, then promptly forgot her as business commenced. "Gentlemen," William began, "today we finalize the route for the western extension. Our investors require certainty, our construction teams await orders, and time is money. Professor Hammond, please present your findings." Hammond adjusted his spectacles and unrolled the survey maps with practiced precision. "After extensive measurements and calculations, we have two viable options." He indicated the original straight route with his pointer. Option A follows the most direct path through Sector 7, requiring a bridge at Cottonwood Creek and cutting through this valley before joining the existing grade. The men leaned forward, studying the line. "And the second option?" William prompted. "Option B," Hammond continued. Tracing the alternative route, Lottie's heart quickened at seeing her and Dasch'aa's creation presented so formally curves northward for approximately 8 miles before rejoining the main line here. This avoids potential seasonal flooding in the valley but adds distance and requires an additional small bridge. Holcomb cleared his throat disapprovingly. The detour unnecessarily increases costs by an estimated 18%. The drainage concerns are manageable with standard engineering solutions. "Where did this alternative originate?" William asked, frowning slightly. Hammond hesitated. "It was brought to my attention as a consideration." "By whom?" William pressed. Lottie stepped forward before Hammond could answer. "By me, father." All heads turned, expressions ranging from surprise to amusement to irritation. "Charlotte," William's voice carried a warning, "this is hardly—" "I observed the terrain firsthand during my time away from camp," Lottie continued, moving to the table with more confidence than she felt. "The valley soil retains considerable moisture. Spring melt from those northern hills," she pointed to the map, "would channel directly into the proposed rail bed." Holcomb's thin lips pressed tighter. "With all due respect, Miss Caldwell, we've conducted proper geological surveys. Your observations during a misadventure hardly constitute engineering data." "Perhaps not," Lottie conceded, "but there's another consideration." She took a deep breath. "That valley serves as a calving ground for the remaining buffalo herds." An uncomfortable silence fell. Lieutenant Barrett shifted his weight while the investors exchanged glances. "Buffalo," William repeated flatly. "Charlotte, the railroad's purpose is not wildlife preservation." "No, but consider the implications," Lottie pressed. "The native tribes follow the buffalo, destroy their calving grounds, and we risk increased hostilities along the entire route." Lieutenant Barrett nodded thoughtfully. "She raises a fair point. The Army spends considerable resources managing tribal conflicts." "And considerable resources protecting our construction crews," Holcomb countered. "The faster we build, the sooner proper civilization arrives." "At what cost?" Lottie challenged, surprising even herself with her boldness. "The buffalo herds are already decimated. This small deviation could preserve—" "Enough," William interrupted, his patience visibly thinning. "Charlotte, while I appreciate your environmental concerns, this decision must be based on sound financial and engineering principles." He turned to the investors. "Gentlemen, your thoughts?" The older investor, Mr. Whitcomb, tapped the map thoughtfully. "The additional cost is not insignificant. However, native unrest could prove more expensive in the long term." The debate continued, men's voices rising and falling as they argued economic calculations and engineering challenges. Lottie watched her father's face, recognizing the slight furrow between his brows that indicated he was genuinely weighing options rather than merely going through the motions. Just as it seemed the discussion might turn in her favor, a commotion erupted outside. Raised voices, the stamp of horses, men calling for Lieutenant Barrett. A young corporal burst into the tent, breathing hard. "Sir, scouts report a group of Sioux riders approaching from the north, at least a dozen, possibly more behind them." The pocket watch forgotten, the meeting instantly dissolved. Barrett strode out, barking orders to his men. The investors retreated to the safety of the inner camp, while William and Holcomb moved to the tent entrance, straining to see the approaching threat. In the confusion, Lottie slipped away, heart pounding. This was not part of the plan. The survey camp transformed into a defensive position with practiced efficiency. Wagons repositioned, rifles distributed, sentries posted. Lieutenant Barrett deployed his men in a protective formation, while workers grabbed whatever weapons were available: axes, shovels, the occasional revolver. William Caldwell stood beside Barrett, watching the approaching riders through a brass spyglass. "What do they want?" he demanded. "Is this a raid?" "Uncertain, sir," Barrett replied. "They're moving slowly, bunched together rather than spread for attack." And he hesitated, adjusting his own field glasses. "They appear to be flying some sort of white flag." Indeed, the lead rider held aloft a lance with a white cloth tied to its shaft. The party advanced deliberately across the prairie, stopping about 300 yards from camp, close enough to be seen clearly, far enough to retreat if threatened. "It's a parley," Barrett concluded. "They want to talk." "Talk," Holcomb scoffed. "Since when do Sioux want to talk about anything but our departure from their so-called lands?" Lottie pushed her way forward, ignoring her father's disapproving glance. Through Barrett's offered field glasses, she could make out details of the Sioux delegation, about a dozen warriors in total, led by a young man with eagle feathers in his hair. And slightly behind him, nearly hidden. Her heart leapt. Dasch'aa, he'd found allies. "Lieutenant," she said urgently, "they truly come in peace. Look at their formation, their pace. This is a diplomatic party." Barrett studied her with new interest. "You seem quite knowledgeable about native protocols, Miss Caldwell." "I've read accounts," she improvised. "Please give them a chance to speak." William frowned at his daughter's unexpected advocacy, but nodded reluctantly to Barrett. "Proceed with caution, Lieutenant, but I want armed men ready if this is a deception." Barrett selected 2 soldiers to accompany him, then advanced slowly toward the Sioux party, one man carrying a white handkerchief tied to a ramrod. Lottie watched breathlessly as they met midway between the camp and the waiting warriors. Words were exchanged, gestures made. After several tense minutes, Barrett returned to the camp perimeter. "Their leader calls himself Young Elk," he reported. "He requests permission to approach and speak with the chief of the Iron Road about matters concerning buffalo and shared lands." "Absolutely not," Holcomb objected. "It's obviously a ploy to assess our defenses." "I disagree," Barrett countered. "If they wanted conflict, they wouldn't announce themselves so openly." He turned to William. "Sir, as the ranking civilian authority, the decision is yours." William's face revealed his internal calculation: risk versus potential benefit, the delay to construction versus the possibility of smoothing relations with locals. Finally, he nodded. "Allow 3 of them to approach, no more, and they must leave weapons behind." Barrett relayed the terms. After brief consultation, Young Elk nodded agreement. He selected 2 companions, one being Dasch'aa, though none of the white men recognized him as Apache rather than Sioux. The 3 advanced slowly, conspicuously unarmed, pride evident in their straight backs and steady gazes. Workers and soldiers alike fell silent as the natives entered the camp, creating an island of stillness amid the tension. Young Elk spoke first, using trade language that Barrett translated haltingly. "The iron road you build cuts through sacred land," Young Elk stated, his voice carrying natural authority despite his youth. "Land where buffalo have birthed their calves since before our grandfathers walked the earth." William's expression remained impassive. "The railroad follows its necessary course. Progress cannot be halted for sentiment." Young Elk's eyes narrowed at the dismissal. "Not sentiment, survival. No calves, soon no buffalo, no buffalo, no Sioux." No Sioux. He let the implication hang in the air. As Barrett translated, Lottie saw her father stiffen. Threats, however veiled, only hardened his resolve. "Father," she interjected quickly, "perhaps we should listen fully before responding." William gave her a sharp look, but nodded for young Elk to continue. Dasch'aa stepped forward then, his gaze finding Lottie's for just a moment long enough to convey silent confirmation of their shared purpose. "Apache scouts have traveled far to witness what happens here," he said in clearer English than young Elk's. "Buffalo connect all tribes. Their path is our path." "Apache?" William's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're a long way from your territories." "As are you," Dasch'aa replied evenly. "Yet here we all stand on the same soil." The simple truth of this statement created a momentary silence, broken when Lottie moved to stand between the groups, no longer just an observer, but a bridge between worlds. Tension hung in the air as Lottie stood between her father and the native delegation. The camp had fallen utterly silent even. The constant clink of tools and murmur of workers had ceased as all eyes focused on this unexpected confrontation. "Father," Lottie said with quiet intensity, "please hear them out. They've come in peace to discuss a solution, not to threaten." William Caldwell studied his daughter with new eyes, noting her sun-browned face, the confidence in her stance so different from the proper Boston debutante who'd accompanied him west. Something had changed in her during those days away from camp. "Very well," he conceded, gesturing toward the command tent. "We'll continue our discussion in private." Inside, the map table became neutral territory. Young Elk and Dasch'aa stood on one side, William and Professor Hammond on the other. Lottie positioned herself at the table's end, while Barrett remained near the entrance present, but allowing the parties to speak freely. "Show them the routes," William instructed Hammond, who unrolled the survey maps. Young Elk examined them with surprising familiarity, immediately identifying the carving grounds. "Here," he pointed, "is where buffalo mothers come each spring. Since the time of our ancestors, this has been sacred space." "And here," Dasch'aa added, tracing the alternative route, "the iron horse could still pass without destroying what cannot be rebuilt." William's brow furrowed. This alternative would add considerable expense and delay construction by months. "And what is the cost of the alternative?" young Elk asked. "When the last buffalo falls, who pays that price?" William began a dismissive response, but Lottie intervened. "Father, may I speak with you? Alone." Surprised by her assertiveness, William nodded stiffly. They stepped outside, walking a short distance from the tent. "Charlotte, what has gotten into you?" he demanded once they were out of earshot. "Since when do you advocate for Indian interests against your own family's business?" "Since I saw the buffalo," she answered simply. "Since I learned what the railroad will destroy if we don't act with wisdom rather than expedience." "This is business, not a conservation society," William retorted. "It's our legacy," Lottie countered. "What do you want to be remembered for, father? Another businessman who took the cheapest route, or the visionary who balanced progress with preservation?" William's expression revealed inner conflict. "You sound like your mother," he said quietly. "She always saw beyond ledgers and profit margins." "Then honor her by listening," Lottie pressed. "The Apache scout Dasch'aa saved my life during the stampede. He could have left me to die, but instead he helped me. He showed me the carving grounds, taught me about the balance of the plains." "You were with him?" William's face darkened. "All this time?" "Yes, and I learned more about this land in 3 days with him than in all our months of surveys and reports." She took a deep breath. "Father, we have an opportunity here. Not just to build a railroad, but to build it right, to be the company that found a better way." William turned, gazing across the prairie, stretching endlessly under the vast sky. For a moment, Lottie glimpsed something in his expression, perhaps recognition of something larger than quarterly profits and shareholder expectations. They returned to the tent, where an uneasy silence had prevailed. William approached the map table with deliberate steps, studying both routes with new attention. "Professor Hammond," he said finally, "explain to me again the engineering challenges of each option, not the costs, not the timelines, just the physical realities." Hammond blinked in surprise but complied, detailing the terrain features, drainage concerns, and structural requirements of both routes without his usual economic commentary. "And Mr. Holcomb's objection to the northern route was primarily financial?" William confirmed. "Yes," Hammond nodded. From a purely engineering perspective, both routes are viable. William turned to the two native men. If we were to adopt this alternative route, would the Sioux and Apache support its construction? Not merely tolerate, but actively ensure peaceful passage through these territories. Young Elk and Dasch'aa exchanged glances before Young Elk answered, "If the Iron Horse spares the buffalo grounds, we would have no cause for conflict." William nodded slowly. Then, in a decisive movement, he reached for the survey document and signed his name at the bottom of the page, showing the alternative route. "Professor Hammond, prepare revised construction orders," he directed. "Lieutenant Barrett, please inform your superiors that we've reached an understanding with local tribes that should reduce tensions along the route." Holcomb burst into the tent, having overheard. "Mr. Caldwell, this is madness. The investors will be informed of my decision," William cut him off sharply, "a decision that balances immediate costs against long-term benefits." The signed survey document lay on the table, official commitment to a new direction. Autumn sunlight bathed the prairie in golden hues as a small crowd gathered near the railway station at Fort Kearny. A newly erected wooden platform, decorated with red, white and blue bunting, held a cluster of dignitaries facing the assembled spectators, railway officials, army officers, local settlers, and significantly, a delegation of Sioux and Apache representatives. William Caldwell, his beard now fully white, stood at the podium. Beside him, Lieutenant Charlotte Caldwell, Ph.D., candidate at Cornell University's newly established program in natural sciences, surveyed the crowd with quiet satisfaction. Her dissertation on prairie ecosystem preservation had drawn attention from Washington officials interested in the novel concept of conservation. 5 years ago, William began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, the transcontinental northern extension faced a choice between expediency and foresight. Today, we gather to dedicate the Great Plains Bison Sanctuary, adjoining our railway and encompassing 30,000 acres of protected grazing land. He gestured toward the open prairie beyond the station, where a herd of several hundred buffalo grazed peacefully, their dark forms stark against the golden grass. The railway tracks curved visibly northward around the sanctuary's boundaries. The extra 8 miles of steel, a small price for what had been preserved. Near the front of the crowd stood Dasch'aa, now serving as the sanctuary's first official liaison between government authorities and tribal representatives. His traditional clothing was complemented by a notebook in which he recorded migration patterns and carving rates data that Lottie had taught him to document using Western scientific methods. While he taught university researchers traditional ecological knowledge passed down through generations. William continued, acknowledging the many parties whose cooperation had made this unprecedented project possible. The military had discovered that protecting defined buffalo territory required fewer resources than constantly responding to conflicts. Tribal relations had stabilized along the railway corridor. Even investors had been pleased when passenger traffic exceeded projections, travelers eager to witness the magnificent creatures from the safety of observation cars. After the speeches, as the crowd dispersed toward the refreshment tables, Lottie made her way to Dasch'aa. "The calves from this spring are thriving," he reported, their professional relationship now comfortable after years of collaboration. "Strongest herd growth since we began counting." "Excellent," Lottie nodded. "The university committee will be pleased. Their funding depends on demonstrating successful preservation models." They walked together toward a bronze plaque, newly installed at the sanctuary's boundary marker. The inscription read, "Great Plains Bison. Sanctuary established 1881, where wisdom prevailed over expedience and diverse peoples found common cause in preserving nature's balance for future generations." "Your father has changed," Dasch'aa observed, watching William deep in conversation with young Elk, now a respected tribal elder despite his relative youth. "As have we all," Lottie replied. "He sees himself as a steward now, not merely a builder." In the years following that pivotal decision, William Caldwell had surprised everyone by becoming an unlikely advocate for balanced development. The railway company's annual reports now proudly featured the sanctuary as evidence of their modern approach to expansion, part public relations, part genuine evolution in thinking. I received a letter from Cornell yesterday, Lottie said. They've approved my proposal for a summer field research station here. Students will study the herd and learn from tribal knowledge keepers. Bringing the young ones to see with new eyes, Dasch'aa nodded approvingly. This is how change continues. As they spoke, a train whistle sounded in the distance. The 3:15 from Chicago approaching on schedule. The buffalo herd, now accustomed to the regular passage, barely lifted their heads at the sound. The sanctuary had created sufficient distance that the iron horse no longer threatened their ancient rhythms. The unlikely friendship between a railroad magnate's daughter and an Apache scout had rippled outward, creating consequences neither could have imagined during their desperate journey 5 years earlier. What began as an effort to save one calving ground had evolved into a model studied by government officials considering similar protections in Yellowstone and other Western territories. Lottie watched a buffalo calf frolic near its mother, strength and vitality embodied in its awkward movements. Like the young sanctuary itself, it represented hope fragile, requiring protection but resilient when given the chance to thrive.